Okay, so we built an annual conference for the YCEI this year. This is the big conference, and we structured it to have themes that crossed science and policy, and government and industry. All right, that was the intent. The original intent of the YCEI, of the Climate and Energy Institute, was to fold in these forces in society into one theme, and to educate everybody across those lines. Okay, so we didn't shy away from it this year, and we attempted to mix science with folks interested in policy and industry, which, you know, everybody thought was a bad idea. But I think I think it was a successful idea, and we'll see in about a week whether people appreciate it or not. Okay, and so there were three topics that we're going to explore in the conference that we're going to explore today, and the topics have to do with genetics and bioenergy. So we're exploring three topics in the energy sector: genetics and bioenergy, production of energy through altering the genetic information in organisms, solar fuels, which is using, in this case, production of hydrogen directly through using solar energy, okay? And then batteries and energy storage. So today's talks will cross those topics. Andre Talyor is going to talk about batteries and energy storage, and Jordan Peccia will talk about genetics and bioenergy. And so if I have to decide, then Jordan, we'd be able to go first, please. And I just want to note that this effort was not just today, but the evolution of the conference has been a tremendous effort that was driven by students, okay? Well, I should say it was driven by me yelling at students, and I want to note Danila Haspatsky, yes, did I get it right? And Yupo Zhao, Brian Mars, who's been a great inspiration, and Joseph Edgars, who's been a great inspiration. You can raise your hand, Joe. There you go. These guys have really worked very hard to get this together. Yoni Cohn is also involved, and I don't see him here. Okay. And so know that, for the students in the audience, that if you want to get involved in this and you want to help, this is really a great opportunity to interact with top scientists and industry folks and government folks. And so I recommend getting involved. Anyway, I think we'll get started, right?
So thank you very much for inviting me to talk, and I'll try and keep it to 15 minutes or less. So today I'd like to tell you a little bit about biofuels and genetics. The group that is working on this in my lab is with Hamid Rizmani Yazdi, Bharat Hosni Daraglu, Daryl Reeves from computational biology and bioinformatics, and PhD student Kyle Bibby. And I think I received a lot of information on what to talk about. Some said talk very broadly about things. Others said talk about your research, and yet another comment said talk about the efforts at Yale. So I've kind of woven all of those into this 15-minute talk. According to the Department of Energy, the demand for liquid fuels used in the United States transportation is projected to remain constant over the next 20 years or so, with petroleum-derived gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel comprising nearly 90% of the demand. The idea that they're thinking about here is that although we're going to offset some of the liquid fuel that we need because of battery-powered cars and better efficiency in cars and planes and diesel-powered vehicles, we're still going to grow, and we're going to need more of them. And so we still need to be thinking about liquid transportation fuels. Well, this isn't a policy talk, and hopefully I don't get stuck talking too much about when peak oil production will happen or occur in the world. But I know that this graph is a couple years old, and I think they already said that it's going to happen, and I haven't heard anything about it. But there is no doubt that at some point, peak oil production will occur, and at some point, the demand for oil is going to cross that peak oil production, and then oil is going to cost a lot more. Gas is going to cost a lot more. So, we can grow things and we can turn them into liquid fuels, and sounds like a pretty good alternative. This is a kind of a big, messy plot, and it suggests to you, starting out with solar radiation, we can get all over, at least somewhere along here, to liquid fuels. And the path we take can be many-fold. We can start with things like solid biomass. We can look at sugars in plants. We can take something like algae or oil or soybean or jatropha. Some we can process into oil that can be transesterified into diesel fuel. Others can be fermented like sugar into ethanol or butanol, etc. And then some can be done by heavy-duty chemical processes like pyrolysis, and then through something like Fischer-Tropsch to get to liquid fuels. The one I want to talk about today, and the one that we work on most in my lab, is algae. This is one of the maybe hopefully key solutions to some of the liquid fuel problems that we find ourselves in right now. So algae are photosynthetic. We're interested in algae because they are very, very efficient harvesters of photosynthetic of solar energy. They reduce carbon dioxide in growth in an autotrophic cycle, and we don't want to say that it's carbon neutral, but they certainly can offset, there's certainly an offset there. Let's see. Algae can be used for a lot of different things. They can be used for aquaculture feed. They can be used for electricity generation and solid fuels. They can produce a lot of starch and use them for bioethanol production. They can produce a lot of lipids, and we can use them in diesel fuel. They produce really nice things like vitamins A, C. They make phytosterols. They make beta-carotene. They make vitamin E. There's a big list. They make a lot of nice stuff. And when we stress them, they even do better. I guess that's kind of a global lesson. Here's a plot of a lot of different literature put together of microalgae in an unstressed condition. These are the clear circles, and in a stress condition, these are the dark gray circles. And if you put an average on that, you see that by weight, they can make about 45% lipid content, and most of these extra lipids are triglycerides that can be directly transesterified into diesel fuel versus when they're not stressed.
What's
Stress can be, it can be too much light, it can be nitrogen deprivation, it might even be sulfur deprivation, it can be different temperatures. The general rule or the general comment that people like to say is microalgae beats corn, palm, and soy. And that's because the lipid content per algal biomass can be a lot higher. There's also greatly reduced acreage than the estimates for producing a lot of liquid fuels. We could make if we, just taking the basic sort of estimates now of what we can do with microalgae, if we take Montana, provided Montana was hot all day, all year long, and we turned it into a big pond, we'd be set. That's probably not feasible, but it's better than what we're going to get if we do this with corn. Let's see. There's a faster growth rate, and there's ostensibly better sustainability metrics, although there's a lot of argument here about how much nitrogen is used, how you can recycle nitrogen, what needs to be done for energy inputs to compress carbon dioxide. A lot needs to be worked out. There's many life cycles now, assessments on microalgae, and we've learned a lot of things from those life cycle assessments. The upshot is that we're not quite there yet. We don't have a real good algae production process, and so I think our life cycle assessments still need to grow as we develop this. But overall, and the reason we're interested in genetics is because, we're a long ways from beating oil production. If algae made oil in the ground and we could pump it out, we would do that. But unfortunately, right now, gasoline is still less expensive than bottled water in the United States, and we've got to do something to make the production of microalgae better. Well, genetic approaches can help. They can help in a few ways. Microalgae did not evolve for us to use them to make biofuels. They have some nice characteristics that we can exploit, but if we want them to do exactly what they need to do in order to make a more economic biofuel, genetic engineering is at least in play. And if you want to say that it's not in play, we still need to know a lot about the genetics of microalgae in order to optimize growth regimes, feeding regimes, etc. So our lab sort of looks at this in a threefold way. We look at biochemical engineering, we're doing transcriptomics, and then we apply bioinformatics to get a lot of genetic information from these microalgae. And the reason that we're doing this is because microalgae weren't so cool like 5 years ago. And when everybody was sequencing plants and bacteria and humans and fish, nobody was sequencing microalgae. And it's partly because nobody was interested, or few people were interested, and it's also because microalgae genomes are very large. So they're not like bacteria. They're 100 to 200 times bigger than bacteria, 100 megabases. They're like a plant. And even though we can sequence faster than we used to, it still takes a lot to sequence the genome. And if we don't have the genome, we don't have the blueprints. A compromise to do that is to sequence only the transcribed genes in algae. These are the ones we care about in the first place, and we call that the transcriptome. So if we take microalgae and we grow them under lots of different conditions, this is an algae, Dunaliella tertiolecta. It's a seawater algae, and it produces a lot of lipids, it produces a lot of starch, and it produces a lot of nice things like beta-carotene. And you can see after multiple days of growth, if you starve it of nitrogen, you get a difference in growth curves. You can do the same thing with salinity. The growth curves don't change much, but when you look at the productions, the type of things that they make, you'll notice that the average lipid content won't change with nitrogen deprivation, but the starch content will change. It'll double, actually, when you deprive them of starch. There's also some changes in changing the molarity and the strength of the saline solution that they're grown in. And taken all together, what we can do is we can grow them under lots of different conditions so they express lots of different genes. Those genes are out there and expressed. We can take that RNA, turn it into DNA, and sequence it. So let's just focus on this middle section. The details are on both sides to say how we do this. But we're taking advantage of next-generation sequencing technologies. We started off with 454 pyrosequencing. Now we moved to Illumina pyrosequencing, where we get a lot more reads for less money. We extract RNA, turn it into DNA. These are the only expressed genes. We normalize it so we don't get too many peaks of one gene versus another gene, because we don't want all our sequencing to go into a gene that's expressed a lot. We want to describe a whole transcriptome. We do some stuff to make it work in the sequencer, and then we sequence it. Those sequences are short reads, around 400 bases long, and we need to assemble them into longer genes and assemble them eventually into a transcriptome. We use a lot of different bioinformatic programs to do that, and to take these short sequences, overlap the nucleic acid sequences, and get them into longer genes, so we have transcripts. We take those transcripts and we blast them, or we do gene annotation, we figure out what they are, and then we have now a long list of transcripts in a sequenced microalgae. And here's the reason we'd want to do this. As I said before, there's only a few microalgae that have been sequenced, and it turns out they're not the ones that make a lot of starch and a lot of lipid. So if we want to take advantage of what Mother Nature has given us, some algae that can really make a lot of lipids, we're going to have to do something different to get genomic information from them. So Dunaliella has never been sequenced, and the other ones that we're dealing with right now haven't been sequenced as well. So we're doing this transcriptome work. Here's just a few kind of statistics on this, and what I want you to kind of focus on in the bottom is that we get nice coverage, 30-fold coverage overall of these different genes, so we get nice overlap on them, and a pretty good description of the transcribed genes. When we put those against databases, our organism looks like an algae. That is, the types of sequences that it matches with best are things from the few microalgae that have been sequenced in their genomes, Volvox and C. reinhardti. When we start annotating them very specifically and looking how do they fit into pathways, we're able to sort of get some ideas of generally how many enzymes are in a pathway, known enzymes, and how many sequences we can find fitting those pathways. So this is the Calvin cycle. We found 12 of the 13 sequences generally in the Calvin cycle. This is triglyceride synthesis. We found 5 of the 6. For fatty acid biosynthesis, we found 14 of 14. We found all the starch enzymes as well. And when you do that, you can start assembling them into pathways. Now we know a pathway for starch synthesis. We know the pathway for fatty acid synthesis and how that feeds into triglyceride synthesis. We're working now to make these quantitative so we can look at the different expression levels of not just one gene, but of multiple pathways and how the pathways prior to that feed into it. Because if you want to genetically engineer something, you can't just say, oh, well, look, here's the first gene in the triglyceride pathway. Let's just overexpress that and see what happens. It's not going to work. What you have to think about is how all the genes need to be expressed, and you have to also think about how the carbon is partitioned in the microalgae into that expression. So there's many, many different steps, and there's probably got to be a lot of different genetic engineering. Oh, okay. Done in order to make these microorganisms do what we want them to do. So, let's see, never popular if we show a lot of pathways. Just want to show you that we're able to describe the starch pathway very well also. So, ongoing research in our lab right now is that we're just now getting to the point where we're making this work quantitative. And there's some tricks because you can do this quantitatively in something like the human genome where you have this genome template. We don't have any full genome templates for these microalgae right now. So we have to make the template first through the transcriptome and then find a way to get the software to work in order to sort of add up all those different transcribed copies of transcribed genes. But hopefully that will happen soon. We're doing this not only in Dunaliella, but in other candidate microalgae like Cenodesmus biamorphus and Neochlorosis oleoabundans, right? We're also making them dance. We're doing all kinds of things. We're adding nitrogen, taking away nitrogen. We've got different methods of putting on, more or less baking them. Very high incident radiation, and we can make them grow in a very dense pattern. We can make them make a lot of lipids, a little bit of lipids, and through all of those different tests, and we look at the quantitative transcriptome, we get a good idea about how they're taking care of business. When they make more lipids, hopefully we'll be in a very good position very soon to understand how they're making those lipids, and we'll be able to exploit those procedures. The activities at Yale right now, there's lots of them, and I'm sure I've missed some of them, but some that are quite active in the biofuel production arena is Julie Zimmerman and Paul Anastas at the Center for Green Chemistry. They're doing things like designing chemical surfactants for the polar microalgal lipids, the ones that we don't use in biofuels. Julie is working on supercritical fluid extraction and better ways to get lipids out of these microalgae, which is a large barrier, and then also on life cycle analysis. So, of course, Scott Strobel, he's got his mycodiesel microorganism, and he sequenced that genome, I know, and he's put together pathways for that as well. Rob Bayless works a lot in sustainability of biofuel production in developing countries, and I think Jatropha, I know specifically. And then, something that ties all this work together in the new large amount of sequences we get is somebody like Mark Gerstein in bioinformatics, who's very helpful in putting all this work together. That's it. Okay.
So the way this business is done is to take some organism and to stress it, right? And then to produce, well, in this case, you're looking at producing biodiesel, right? Because you're after the fatty acids.
That's right.
So you're stressing it under various conditions in order to express a higher proportion of fatty acids or triglycerides, right?
That's right.
And then you're mimicking that expression through genetic alteration so that it just produces this sort of thing in a natural state, right?
Yeah, that's the idea. So if we can perturb it some way that it produces more lipids, and it has its own method for producing those more lipids, and that's probably the most stable way. And then we look at the expressed genes and see how those pathways are expressed. We have a roadmap of how it likes to do it naturally, and then that's what we would want to sort of turn on permanently
And
for genetic engineering.
And what's your best guess, you know, in terms of maximum production by doing this? You know, what can you get out of this?
Yeah, and my best guess is, yeah, that's a hard one, but I can say reasonably that right now the triglyceride production in microalgae, or the overall lipid production is often around 20–30%. And I see it very reasonably going up to 50%. And there are indeed microorganisms that can do that already, but not constantly. But I think you could do that. Any more, you take away the carbon from the rest of the organisms, and it's too harsh.
I'm going to tell a little bit about solar fuels. There was a previous meeting that the students ran, and James Blakemore gave a talk at that meeting. Some of you might have been there. And I think he talked a lot about he's in my research group, works at our solar group in the chemistry department, and some of you might have heard that. So I'm going to focus my talk not so much on my own research, but more on the issue of solar fuel. What are the issues with solar fuels? And I want to start out by first a little bit of argument, why solar, and why do we need fuels for solar? And then how do we make solar fuels, and what are the methods, and what are the pros and cons, or advantages and disadvantages, limitations for that? And then I'll just end with a brief maybe introduction about what we're trying to do in our own research group, but I won't focus most of the time on that. So I probably don't have to say very much about solar energy, but I thought I'd just give an argument for renewables. This is a paper that Dan Kamen wrote in Scientific American about 5 years ago, and it shows a pie chart of where we get our energy, at least as of 2006. Here's coal, oil, and natural gas, and this little sliver is non-hydroelectric renewables. And of that little sliver blown up here, that little sliver is solar energy. So we're getting much, much less than 1% of our energy is coming from solar energy right now. And it's even worse in the United States. This is global. Here's the United States, coal, oil, and natural gas. You can see here's all the renewables, including hydroelectric there. We're even worse in the United States. So we need to focus on renewables, and I think by everybody's analysis, the only renewable energy that has the capacity to power the planet is solar energy. Nuclear potentially, but I think nuclear is rapidly losing favor now with the problems that the nuclear reactors are having in Japan. So for solar energy, there's some sort of snippets. You know, I should maybe go back, but point out that as of 2005, the consumption, global energy consumption was about 16 terawatts. It's a little higher than that now. And that's about enough energy in 1 hour of sunlight striking the surface of the Earth to power the planet for a year, if we could collect it. And in fact, photosynthesis is basically harvesting about 90 terawatts at the present time. That's, of course, in a cyclic process. We're not storing biomass at that amount, but they are collecting solar energy at that level. So how can we do it? And so this is a picture you probably have seen. This is a map of the globe showing the solar energy intensity in terms of watts per meter squared. Orange is high solar energy capacity, blue and violet low. And you can see, regions like the Sahara Desert and much of Australia have a lot of solar energy capacity. And these little circles represent areas that if we summed up these 6 circles, we would have a capacity of generating 18 terawatts if we had 10% conversion efficiency for solar energy. And it doesn't look all that impossible to do. Whoops, go back again. Impossible to do. These are not insignificant areas. I mean, for example, this circle in the United States is close to the size of the state of Iowa. Yeah, so there's a pretty substantial need for surface area to do this. And that's at a 10% conversion efficiency, which is reasonably good efficiency. But as Nate Lewis has often said, is that we've paved over that much of the United States already. So if we could make solar energy conversion processes as cheap as asphalt, we'd be in business. Okay, so that's what we're faced with. So how do we do this? We can make electricity, but the problem with electricity is storage. And the sunlight is intermittent, and also electricity has the disadvantage that transmission over long distances has significant losses. And so we'd like to be able to make fuel not only for transportation fuels, which Jordan focused on, but also just as a way of storing solar energy. And so, the idea here is we'd have some solar energy collection process and conversion to fuel, and I'll talk about how that might be done. That allows us to store, and it could be fed back into fuel cells to make electricity again if we wanted, or as transportation fuels. And so that's what we'd like to be able to do. So how do you do that? What is fuel? Basically, fuel is a molecule that is in its reduced form and is able to react with oxygen and release energy. And any molecule that's in a reduced form that will react with oxygen will work. So here's hydrogen. But the currency of fuel formation is electrons. You need to have a source of electrons in order to generate fuel. And on a global scale, there's only one source of electrons that would meet the bill, and that's water. So we have to learn how to split water if we want to make fuel with solar energy. And this is the basic reaction if you want to split water to make hydrogen and oxygen. And this is a decomposition of two reactions. We have to take water and extract electrons from it, and then use those electrons to make fuel, which could be hydrogen. So that's the chemistry of fuel formation. And the hard part of this is the water oxidation reaction. That's a hard reaction to do. That's the bottleneck in solar fuel formation, and it's been a focus of a lot of effort by many research groups over the years to try to figure out efficient ways to do water oxidation. That's the hard part of the reaction. Well, there is one way that this works, and it works extremely well, and that was invented about 2.5 billion years ago, maybe more, by nature and photosynthesis. And this is the overall reaction that nature does. It extracts electrons from water. Nature figured out that if you want electrons on a global scale, you've got to oxidize water, so that's what it does in oxygenic photosynthesis. Oxygen is being produced. That's created an aerobic atmosphere, currently about 21% oxygen in the atmosphere. The fuel that's made is initially made by reducing carbon dioxide. So electrons extracted from water are given to carbon dioxide to make carbohydrates initially, but then all biomass comes from that. And that's the overall stoichiometric reaction for photosynthesis. It's been occurring in excess over the 2.5 billion years or so since oxygen evolving organisms first appeared, so that we have now 21% oxygen in the atmosphere. It's buried it's matched stoichiometrically by buried biomass that is equivalent to that amount of oxygen. I get my straightened out. And that buried biomass is the fossil fuel. So we're actually powering the planet on solar fuels right now, and it's in the form of fossil fuels. And to give you some idea of the magnitude of this, we've been burning these biomass fossil fuels for hundreds of years and at an increasing rate, and we haven't changed the oxygen concentration in the atmosphere at all, or not significantly. What does that mean? It means there's a heck of a lot of buried biomass, and we're not going to run out of fossil fuels anytime soon. The biggest issue is carbon dioxide production and the issues with climate change associated with that. So we really are talking about two things. One is carbon-free fuel or carbon neutral, and the production of these fuels using solar energy. So how do we do that? Well, ideas for this have been kicking around for a long time. This is, some of you probably familiar with this paper that was published in Science in 1912, 99 years ago, by Giacomo Cimician. And I'll just read this quote to you from this paper. He said, "On the arid lands there will spring up industrial colonies without smoke and without smokestacks. Forests of glass tubes will extend over the plains, and glass buildings will rise everywhere. Inside of these will take place the photochemical processes that hitherto have been the guarded secret of the plants, but will have been mastered by human industry, which will know how to make them bear even more abundant fruit than nature, for nature is not in a hurry and mankind is." Pretty amazing that was written nearly 100 years ago. So that's what we're aiming to do. We still don't have a process that can do this, but that's the goal. And actually, Cimician was pictures of him working in his laboratory, which is his backyard, with all kinds of flasks and things laying out, sitting out in the sunlight as he was trying to come up with photochemical processes to convert solar energy. Didn't succeed very well, but he certainly started the process. Okay, so how do we do this? So I'm going to focus on two general ways that you could make fuel with solar energy. One is an indirect method to produce solar fuel. So first, indirect method is, let's make electricity from photovoltaics. We know how to make photovoltaics. We know how to make electricity from sunlight. It's sitting on the top of Kroon Hall here. We're making electricity with silicon photovoltaics. And let's use that electricity to electrolyze water and make hydrogen. So here's some solar panels, various pictures of them. Thanks to James Blakemore, I stole them out of your PowerPoint presentation. And here's a picture of how an electrolyzer would work. You have an electrolysis process. Here's a voltage that's generated by a photovoltaic. And it's creating a voltage that will create water oxidation at one electrode surface, water being converted to oxygen. That's generating electrons, which pass through the electrical circuit, and protons, which have to be passed from one interface to the next. And those protons and electrons then are being combined to produce hydrogen at the so-called cathode, where the reduction half of the reaction occurs. So that's the overall process, and if we can make electricity, we can electrolyze water. This is something we all did as kids, right? And works just fine. And the advantages of this indirect method is that we have known technology. We know how to make photovoltaics. We know how to electrolyze water. It has another advantage in terms of fuel production is that you could imagine coupling large solar arrays with a centralized fuel production module that would enable more efficient fuel collection. One of the disadvantages of having fuel that's produced over acres and acres of land is how do you collect it? So you talk about extraction processes, but those are extremely the engineering of that is going to be really difficult. You also, in this kind of a scheme, have the potential that you could imagine individual fuel production on each of our rooftops. We could have solar panels on our roof, and we could make hydrogen in our, store it in our house, and then at night we'd have the fuel available to generate electricity at night when the sun's not shining. And so that's certainly an advantage. And another advantage is that it's already possible to have overall high efficiency, greater than 10% overall conversion efficiency. Photovoltaics, commercial photovoltaics are in the 15% to 20% conversion efficiency range. Electrolyzers, the best ones have about 80% conversion efficiency. So we can imagine pretty high conversion efficiencies. And this is something that is very critical. Conversion efficiency correlates with how much land area do you need to collect solar energy. And that's a big issue with many processes, and it's also a big issue with biofuels because plant conversion efficiency is quite low. So we need much, much bigger land area for biofuel production with current efficiencies. We need to ramp up those efficiencies to make these good enough. And so this already is possible with photovoltaics. The disadvantage, of course, why aren't we using photovoltaics? It's economics. Jordan showed, $3.50, maybe now it's closer to $4 a gallon. That's really cheap. We don't have any technology that can make fuels that cheap, and so these are very expensive. If we would use this indirect method where we've got large solar arrays that are coupled to catalyst electrolysis processes, you need good catalysts. This has to go very fast to keep up with large arrays of solar energy, so catalyst development becomes an issue for this. That's chemistry. And another disadvantage is that you make lots of junctions and you transfer electricity over larger distances, and you're going to get losses from electrical and junction resistances. So those are issues that are perhaps disadvantages for this indirect method. So obviously, if there's an indirect method, there must be a direct method, right? And so what's the direct method? That's what photosynthesis does. Photosynthesis uses light. This is a cartoon picture taken from the University of Illinois, Don Ort's lab, where you have photochemical processes that are directly using light to oxidize water and using the electrons generated to reduce carbon dioxide in the Calvin cycle. So this is a direct process where these oxidation reactions, reduction reactions are directly coupled to the photochemical processes. And we're going to hear from Nate Lewis at our annual conference coming up about his center, the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis, which is housed at Caltech, or centered at Caltech, and he's leading this effort and has been awarded the DOE Solar Fuels Hub Award. This has a $125 million grant they just landed last year to develop processes for solar fuel production. And he'll tell us about that in his talk. But basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to generate processes that are going to give direct production of solar fuels. So here's a sort of a schematic of the idea here. It's not necessarily the exact arrangement they would use, but basically we have some kind of system which is absorbing light and creating a voltage that is directly used by catalysts that are on the oxidation side to produce water, oxygen for water, and on the reduction side to produce hydrogen. So it's an all-integrated unit that would then generate fuel formation, hydrogen in the form of fuel and oxygen by water splitting by direct photochemical conversion. Okay, so this sounds great. What are some of the advantages? The advantages, of course, you have the potential for very high efficiency. You don't have all these resistance losses that you might imagine for the indirect method. And you have the possibility that you could create a single solar fuel module that would basically make fuel. So that would be great. Disadvantage, this is unknown technology. So we don't know how to do it. So that's the problem. That's why they gave $125 million to California to try to come up with a way to do this. So we don't have, well, I wouldn't say it's totally unknown. There are in the research lab, there are processes that will do this, but with very poor efficiency, nowhere close to 10%, less than 1% efficiency, even less than that. And so that's a problem. We need some significant amount of research to do this. And another disadvantage is that if you have these integrated systems, you're making fuel everywhere over this entire solar array. If you're covering the state of Iowa with a solar array, how do you collect that fuel into, put it into a pipeline or however we're going to do it? And so you've got this decentralized fuel production with large arrays, it complicates fuel collection. So that's going to be more of an engineering issue, but that's an issue that has to be dealt with as well. So where is the field of solar fuels going? Well, most of the research right now is trying to develop methods to do these processes. We need better methods for integrating these systems, better catalysts to do these reactions, and so it's really at the level of research right now. And the goal of the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis is actually to push the research forward, but then integrate them into a functioning module, and then hopefully ramp up the efficiency progressively. And I think the benchmark everybody talks about is about 10% efficiency. If you really want to have something that becomes commercially viable, you need to get up to about 10% efficiency to make it really fly. Well, that's what solar fuel, the field is, and I'll just end by saying we're trying to do some of that research in our group here. We have a collaboration that involves 4 of our research groups, four PIs in chemistry. Here's Charlie. Charlie's in the audience over here, Charlie Schmittenmeyer, Bob Crabtree, and Victor Batista and myself. And we're joining forces with different expertise to try to develop processes for solar fuel production by improving catalysts and attaching them to semiconductor materials for photochemical reactions that could give direct photochemical solar fuel production. And this is sort of the idea here. At least in the research lab, this is a picture of a photoelectrochemical cell that actually Gary Moore, who's going to moderate our session, has been working on and has a system that actually makes fuel with sunlight, but efficiencies aren't high yet. But the idea is we would use a photochemical process with catalysts that would split water to release electrons or oxidize water and use those electrons to generate a fuel like hydrogen. So that's what we're trying to do. It's an ongoing research effort, and I'm not going to go into any more details on that, but I think that's where I'd like to end about what I have to say on solar fuels. Okay, thanks for listening.
Hello. Thank you for the invitation to come to this great kickoff meeting. I'm very excited about the work that's been taking place. So my name is Andre Talyor, and I'm going to talk to you about energy storage and batteries for the third component of this kickoff. So we had a couple of purposes, and the first purpose that I was told is, okay, let's provide the campus with the background knowledge on the techniques. Let's get the campus excited about and prepared for the conference. Let's generate possible interdisciplinary research in the fields among faculty, encourage students to go into the fields, and then next part, let's recap the essential science of the 3 conferences, the topic areas, solar fuels, genomics, and biofuels, and then batteries, and then discuss Yale's engagement and connect the science overall system. And by the way, let's keep this all within 15 minutes. So I was kind of struggling putting this together, but I'm very excited because I think each of these purposes are very valuable here, and I'm glad that we have this kickoff event with the previous things. So I wanted to kind of divide this area. When we're talking about batteries, I wanted to kind of divide this into 3 different areas. One is entertainment, environment, and healthcare, and I'll kind of circulate around these 3 themes as kind of motivating factors for battery technology. And so how many of you have heard of this company, Korea? By a show of hands, who's heard of this company? No, nobody in the room. Nobody at all. Okay, so good. So I'm talking about something that no one's heard of. So this company Korea right here. So they're actually based right here. So of course there was the unfortunate Japanese earthquake that happened a few weeks ago, and actually this place right here has 70% of the global market share for lithium polymer batteries. So in fact, the plant for Korea wasn't actually torn apart, but the port city right here, this Onahama port city right here, has been damaged, so they can't export the material. So according to Vishal Sapru from the Frost & Sullivan and Wall Street Journal, he said, it's definitely going to be a problem, in many mobile products use lithium polymer batteries. And so how does this affect everyone in this room? Well, it might affect people that use portable electronics, and then maybe no more iPods, iPads, or iPhones, and that's a very big concern for people that are in technology. So that's my entertainment spin and motivation behind batteries for this application. Now, the issue right here when we're talking about sources and carriers is what kind of sources do we have, what kind of carriers can we put together, and it becomes kind of a chicken egg type of challenge. So we have different sources right here, whether we started off with hydroelectric or coal, moving towards nuclear, which might not be, as mentioned earlier, as popular now. Solar photovoltaics, definitely biomass conversion with what Jordan's been involved in, and then also working with conventional crude oil or wind power. And the problem is that we have these abundant sources, but then the carriers of these sources becomes a challenge. And of course, we've become very, very comfortable with gasoline, diesel. Matter of fact, when we apply for grants, a lot of the military organizations, can you synthesize this JP8? JP8 is their fuel of choice because all of their vehicles and infrastructure can center around that. But this issue of hydrogen, and so there's different hydrogen energy technology lab centers. I'm a part of one that sprung up from Michigan. And one of the problems with hydrogen is the storage of hydrogen. So it's a great energy carrier, but storage of this is an issue. Electricity, of course, that's great. But then how do you store electricity, and how do you actually have this electricity available due to your point on demand and with natural gas being in the equation? So we have Yetmin Chang, who's coming in from A123, and I just wanted to kind of put this schematic up right here where we talk about these different efficiencies. And so if you look at efficiencies from crude oil to your automobile, so from a well-to-wheel type of efficiency, of course you go through a series of steps right here where you lower your efficiency right here. So whether you mine the oil, go through a refinery system, your internal combustion engine, which what most of us drive right here, and then down to your wheel for transportation, it's about 20% efficient. If you look at this other route pathway right here, where if you're going through, for example, a power plant. And so electric vehicles are great, right? But then if you're plugging in an electric vehicle in your wall, and if it's being powered by oil or by a coal-fired plant, then how does that actually impact your input on the environment? But of course, you can still say that you can get 100 miles per gallon. But there's some very, very interesting things that can actually take place. And with Yetming, with A123, they're developing these vehicles. And if you can imagine when we talk about large area energy storage, and if you can imagine a whole fleet of cars that can store energy, now you might be able to talk about distributed energy, where these cars could maybe have solar panels or that sort of thing on the surface, or they could be plugged in, whereas during high capacity, you could store electricity and then maybe use that for your vehicle to transmit home. So very, very interesting pathway right here. This pathway right here that we have is about 25% efficient. And the area that our group has been active in is in fuel cells. So of course, fuel cells are more efficient, but then also there's different challenges. One of the main challenges is where do you do with your fuel? And the preferred fuel of choice is hydrogen, but of course, hydrogen, of course, with the problems with storage, there's been some breakthrough papers with people that have created metal organic frameworks, so forth, that can give higher storage capacity. But the problem is that those capacities aren't nearly as high as what they need to be. And so in terms of fuel processing, there's a tremendous amount of work a few years ago, I guess it maybe in the late 90s, early change of the millennium, is in this fuel processing. And one of the problems with fuel processors is that if you want to supply a fuel for a fuel cell, you have to go through all these conversion steps. So you have to go through a reforming step, water gas shift, preferential oxidation, and all those steps to get rid of the impurities, such as CO or sulfur, and in order to feed that into a fuel cell. But again, these are some of the issues, the routes right here between energy conversion, energy storage. And so there's some issues right here. There's motivation, and I like the point that Gary brought out, is that we're not going to run out of fuel anytime soon. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And so whether you're talking about whether it's the environmental motivation, or whether you're talking about whether it's these high prices, there is some sort of motivation to look towards energy storage applications. I think money is the main motivating factor, because once gas moves up to $5, I think people go into a panic, and then that's when we start hearing more people, the politicians and so forth, talking about, well, we need to do something. So I think that's a major issue. So just to introduce you to my group right here, so we stroll across Yale's campus right here, and these are several of my group members, and also we have a new group member here, Sylvie Senepa, who just joined our group a couple weeks ago. And so actually what we do is we think about these kinds of issues. So working in the energy storage is of course Sylvie, also Forrest, we have to get a better shot of him. He's kind of camera shy a little bit, but he's actually in the audience out here. And he actually gave a talk earlier about batteries, and I think it was a good talk from the feedback that I received. And of course we have Marcelo, Ryan, Tinghui, Zhao Kai, who's also in our group, and they work on various things. So to kind of introduce you to my group and the things that we do, just to kind of promote a little bit of synergy, and I'm very excited about this opportunity, because I think, I don't think our group has done enough work on our end to make it up the hill to see what people are doing, and I think it's kind of goes both ways, but maybe with these kind of activities we can kind of find out more of the research and start building these kind of alliances. So our area right here, so our philosophy right here is our group focuses on the design and assembly of systems that can renewably improve our way of life. Many of these systems require high-performance nanomaterials for energy conversion and storage. So what are some of the areas that we work in? So we work in organic solar cells. We have a full OPV line where we're actually building a solar test station to go inside so we can fabricate, synthesize, and test organic solar cells. Fuel cells is a fundamental area, and we have a fuel cell test station. Batteries, we have a battery line where we can do testing, and then of course we generate materials such as catalysts for biomass conversion. And so our lab, we can do each of these things. In our lab, we have people that have expertise in all of these areas. And we use various techniques to look at structure property relationships of these nanomaterials that we put together. So whether it's microfabrication, layer by layer assembly, inkjet printing, which I'll talk a little bit about, or nano imprint lithography. And so just to kind of walk you through a few of these things, this is right here. This is a silicon-based micro fuel cell right here. This is starting with silicon. This has integrated heaters, temperature sensors. This image didn't quite come out as well on the projector, but this is carbon nanotubes with zinc oxide decorated on the surface, so we can decorate carbon nanotubes with various transition metals. We've done that for fuel cell applications with platinum. We can do it with ruthenium. We can also do it for biomass conversion, decorating these with nickel, and also with transition metals that alloy with lithium, so we can actually decorate these with tin. And not only that, but we also do the arrangement of these materials, so we use techniques such as layer by layer assembly. This is a freestanding film using layer by layer. We use different charged polyelectrolytes. So the idea here is if you look at this, and I thought this was a good example just to show the problem and the issues with batteries and energy storage. So if you look at this pill right here, this is Philips Intelligent Pill right here. So this is the I pill right here. And so this pill right here, so it's 11 by 26 capsule, has a microprocessor, has a pH sensor, temperature sensor, RF transmitter, transceiver, you have a fluid pump, and you also have a drug reservoir for delivery. And the idea is you can actually take this pill, put this inside, it can pass through the body, hopefully it doesn't impede, but you can also maybe deliver some sort of drug. You have a camera in the system as well, lens holder, CMOS imagery, and this issue right here, this battery, if you look at this right here, so these are the different parts. So you look at this optical dome, you look at this lens holder, the lens, look at this battery right here. It's huge. Takes up a huge amount of real estate of this pill right here. And so if you can imagine if you scale this up, because people are talking about large-scale energy storage, look at this. If we can't do this for a miniature pill with small energy requirements, then think about these large-scale energy storage problems that we have. And that's one of the issues. That's why you don't see batteries that are being used for large-scale applications, and that's a major issue. And so it takes up 40% of this real estate. And so just to kind of cover a few things, like why lithium-ion batteries, which what we're looking at in our group, we're using inkjet printing as a technique to deposit materials, and then also the synthesis of these materials for wafer level. And I'll talk a little bit about some of our future directions that our group is going in. But if you look at kind of the progression of battery chemistry and technologies, if you look here, there's a lead-acid battery right here, nickel cadmium, nickel metal hydride. Let's say, for example, if you had a camera or a cell phone that's maybe, I would say maybe 2004, 2005, if people still have those, then probably use nickel metal hydride. Now the majority of phones are using lithium ion. And so there's different lithium ion chemistries. And the advantage with lithium ion is, of course, you can have higher voltage, higher energy density, lightweight, longer shelf life, and then you can go through a wider temperature range. And so we looked at this and we said there might be an opportunity right here for using different techniques such as microfabrication. And so just to kind of show you a little bit, just to kind of walk you through briefly, Forrest gave some details on how batteries work, but essentially if you have this lithium ion, you have a mobile ion, which is lithium right here, which transports between charge and discharge. So for example, if you're charging a battery, you have lithium that moves forward, sits in these interstitial sites. If you discharge, your lithium moves across to your cathode side, releases electrons. Your electrons travel through this external load right here, which is your power requirement, and that's essentially how they work. And so it becomes a materials mixture issue. So you have different regions. You have your anode, you have your separator region, and then you have your cathode. And each of these materials have specific functionalities that we make for these. And so this right here isn't what we're trying to do right here. We're trying to actually take a lithium-ion battery, fabricate this on chip for small applications where we can actually use these as thin films. So these are 1.5, 5 microns, and 1.5 microns right here. And we're actually working with wafer scale packaging to integrate that together. Now, just to kind of walk you through briefly on what we're doing with inkjet printing, the advantage of inkjet printing is that it's an additive process. And so in terms of looking at nanomanufacturing, inkjet printing, of course, was developed in the 80s, and then in the 90s, people started looking at other applications. For example, this OLED structure right here is created using inkjet printing. And so we're looking at inkjet printing to actually fabricate these batteries and put these in. So the idea is if you understand the chemistry of the inkjet printing system, if you have picoliter volume control for your inkjet printer, then you can have control of the amount of materials. Now remember, you want to control the amount of materials because when you normalize your performance of your battery, your capacity by the mass of the material, then that becomes important, and that's how you rank those materials. And so we've actually used this technique right here for fuel cell applications. This is the interfacial area, catalyst area for a fuel cell right here. And so reducing catalyst layer thickness right here, and what we did right here is we imposed a gradient right here of using different levels of platinum. If you can imagine a battery, most people use just a uniform layer for batteries. If you can actually put in a gradient for a battery, you might actually get a better performance. And this just kind of shows the two performances between these two, a graded catalyst and standard catalyst. Now, just to show you some examples, these are inkjet printed anodes right here that we've produced in our lab right here. This is after about 30 passes. We also have inkjet printed cathodes right here. This is after 30 passes. This is on aluminum thin film system right here, and that's the thickness after about 30 passes, cross-sectional area. Now, the area for improvement for batteries is looking at materials that alloy with lithium. And so if you can find a material that alloys very well with lithium, then you're much better off. And if you look at silicon, silicon is off the charts right here compared to these other elements that alloy with lithium. So about 4,200 milliamp hours per gram. But the problem with lithium is that in bulk form, then it goes through huge volume expansion, about 400% volume expansions when it alloys. Once it goes through that, and then if you do a discharge, then it becomes pulverized. It breaks apart, and the material loses its integrity. And so that's the problem why you don't see silicon. But of course, there's people that are working in that area. For example, Yi Shui at Stanford, he has a Nature Materials paper that came out where he created these silicon-based nanowires. And they're still working on that. He has a company, they're trying to commercialize the technology, and there's still a few things that they're working in that area. And so, like our group, we work with carbon nanotubes. Of course, I mentioned we decorate carbon nanotubes. There's advantages of carbon nanotubes, and we can decorate carbon nanotubes with different alloys right here. This is carbon nanotubes we synthesize right here that are decorated with tin oxide. The idea is these nanoparticles can withstand these volume expansions and shrinkage. Last part is layer-by-layer assembly using different charged polyelectrolytes. It's been used for a variety of different applications. We're starting to maybe consider this for batteries as well. We've done this for fuel cells. The idea is you can create these freestanding films. And the issue in fuel cells, which is the same as batteries, is it's a blending of different materials. And so we're looking at that area as well. And so this is an example right here of a freestanding film we've created. Using layer-by-layer assembly, using different charged polyelectrolytes with nanomaterials, putting this in together, and then also creating a freestanding film that you see right here. And so we can use different polyelectrolytes off the shelf. So if you can imagine blending for a battery different regions, we have the capabilities of doing that within our lab. The last part, and I won't go into full detail on this, is there's different chemistries for batteries as well, just to kind of go into the science. An exciting area is these lithium air batteries right here, and of course the theoretical potential is almost as high as gasoline. That's very exciting. Forrest talked a little bit about this, and I'll be happy to talk with the rest of the group in further detail. But the problem with that is interfacial challenges, interfacial chemistry. So, of course, instead of having an oxide, which you normally have that can alloy with lithium, you can actually have oxygen that can meet with this, but you also have to have this as a barrier for water. You don't want water to get in there, so you have to have an interfacial barrier. So it becomes a fuels area, a materials challenge. This is our latest publication right here. This is coming out in the April edition of ACS Nano, so I guess in a couple days. It's online already, and this is where we use bulk metallic glass nanowires to integrate these in for electrochemical applications, and so we're rapidly moving in this area. So I didn't quite keep it all within all 15 minutes. I went 2 minutes over, but my apologies for that. But we've kind of met the objectives. The idea here is persistence, arrangement, assembly, new materials, interfacial studies. Persistence right here, this Kurhia company, they've been working in this area for 20 to 30 years. Might be why they have 70% of the market locked up. And the last part right here, I just wanted to show you this video right here, if this will work. I just kind of took a stroll. Oh, maybe it did not see. Yeah, I just kind of took a stroll around here, and this is actually in New Haven. This is a windmill that they have, and what might not be hard to see, I took this with my iPhone, and you can see these tanks right here in the very back, and these storage tanks right here, and I think there's a very big opportunity for large-scale energy storage, and I'd be happy to talk with some of you in more detail, but if you can see here, these huge oil tanks right here in the background, we have one windmill. I was at Case Western Reserve. They have one windmill on campus. Maybe that's becoming a theme, but in other places. But I think there's a tremendous area of opportunity where we can actually move from this liquid fuel storage to look at storing this renewable energy and then storing these clean electrons. So thank you for your time.
Start the moderate discussion. Dr. Gary Moore is a postdoc from chemistry department, and he will be moderating the session. And professors, please.
All right, I'd like to start out by thanking our speakers tonight for sharing not only their time, but their knowledge with us in the area of energy. So I think the purpose of tonight's talk was not only to hear from what is essentially Yale's response to what's been called the terawatt challenge, and research and efforts occurring at Yale, but also to raise the level of awareness of the audience in preparation for our bigger meeting next week. And so at this point, we'll have a discussion panel where we'd like to take questions from the audience. But I'll take the opportunity to ask the first question. And this is related to a question I asked last week to our student speakers. And what are the major holdbacks that you see for moving some of these renewable technologies forward? In other words, what are the grand challenges? And why are renewable energies not a larger portion of our current energy infrastructure? So if we could start maybe to my right and move forward.
So if I heard your question correctly, you're saying why isn't there more of a thrust in renewable energy? Is that
Yeah, exactly. Are these scientific holdbacks, policy holdbacks, possibly both? Is the scientific holdbacks greater than the policy holdbacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges is that in the area of research and development, I mean, you actually have to stick with it, and so. United States, if you look at battery technology, United States was a leader in battery technology all the way up until the late 70s, early 80s. And what happened is the United States kind of gave up on that. Whereas, other countries, Japan, they started picking up on that. They started improving it. They stuck with it. And we've lost our leadership. So now, if we want an iPhone, I mean, the company in Japan, they make it specifically there in Japan. And that's why, everyone's kind of worried. That's why the Apple stock price took a dip. But I think it's definitely coupled with politics because it's all in the winds of change. Because for example, my area which I started out in which was in fuel cells, that was very well funded, and then when things kind of happened, for example, Steve Chu, when he came in, he was more interested in batteries. Of course, there's a big battery thrust program at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, and then all the money started coming in, with batteries, commercialization, and that sort of thing. And so. I think those are some of the challenges, is kind of the winds of time and what different technology areas are able to deliver. So I mean, fuel cells was an area that was overhyped and maybe underdelivered in some regards, and then that's what kind of changed some of that attitude towards that.
Thanks.
I mean, I guess it's sort of the common thread among all of these technologies is our political system isn't good at making long-term investments or thinking too far into the future. And the barriers specific to bioenergy, they're different for different types of energy. For instance, methanol production from cellulose or fuels from microalgae, ethanol production from one of the many other ways that you can produce methanol or ethanol are all cost barriers. Right now, it just costs too much money to make a gallon of ethanol or biodiesel from these types of products. The costs, I don't think, are insurmountable, but they're large challenges, and they'll take a sustained, long effort in order to get past them.
Yeah, no, I think it's entirely economics, and gasoline is just too cheap right now to make it viable. These other technologies are just a lot more expensive, and so that's partly a research problem. We need to come up with ways to make it work better and more cheaply. If we had a solar fuel device that put out fuel at $3.50 a gallon, it would happen. But it's much more expensive than that now. But it's also partly, I think, a policy issue too, because we need some leadership to move forward on these, pushing for more renewables. And it's slowly happening, but I think economics is holding it up.
Is on. So lithium is the biggest dog on the block when it comes to electron transfer, and that's why that's why we're using it. That's first.
Yes, pretty much. Yes, that's
You
pretty much
can't do
the
better
same.
than lithium.
Can we clarify the question? Is this a question more related to energy density, or?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of why we're focused on lithium for batteries, is it just because of that we've reached the point where we're comfortable in producing lithium-type batteries, or is it because lithium will be the it allows for the greatest electron transfer, for energy, both for storage and energy generation from batteries.
Yeah. So if you kind of look at so that chart that I put up where you saw the lead acid, the nickel metal hydride, the kind of progression. I mean, the issue with lithium, I mean, of course, before they started figuring out solving the challenges. I mean, of course, if you can remember some of the laptops that caught on fire, because of overcharging, that sort of thing. So I mean, once they started figuring out those systems and being able to keep those isolated where moisture doesn't build up and that sort of thing, then that's when it actually became the chemistry of choice. And so now, I mean, you can start seeing it in more robust areas. So for example, you could see it readily in cameras, but now it's starting to creep in areas, for example, power tools, and now people such as like Yetmin Chang that's coming here, they're looking at lithium chemistries for batteries, and because they've become more stable, where you can go back and forth, and of course lithium is the lightest metal. So
and lithium is found where? I mean, I know that we found a lot of it in Afghanistan. Is there a connection to the geopolitics of moving in the direction of lithium production, lithium batteries, and what does that imply for, interventions around the world?
Yes, that's a very good question. I don't know offhand the top lithium producers, but I do know that the supply has been projected. I've seen in a few reports it's been projected as being relatively stable. So there's no projected shortage of it that I can see.
Question in the back?
My question has to do with the two things that I heard tonight, and that was the questions mainly to do with the algae. But when I was hearing about solar production of fuels, the 10% number got thrown out, and rather than sticking with specific numbers, that seems to be an order of magnitude higher than my knowledge of how efficient plants usually are in terms of converting energy. And so I'm curious what kind of feasibility issues that might be turn into when you think about using algae to create things like transportation fuels for a whole society.
Yeah, maybe I can speak to that first. I was part of a DOE workshop about 1.5 years ago that was convened to actually address the efficiency of photosynthesis and plants and project how it might be improved in the future, in contrast to the efficiency of photovoltaics. And photovoltaics efficiencies are pretty well defined, and there's a so-called Shockley-Queisser limit that says for the single junction device you can do about 31 or 32% conversion efficiency. And I think the number that represents is how much of the total solar spectrum, and if you take that entire solar spectrum, how much of that can be converted into whatever form of energy, electricity or fuel. And if you take that same criteria and ask, what are plants currently doing, and you say, well, let's grow corn for a growing season, the efficiency for the conversion is extremely low. It's much less than 1%. And under the best conditions for plants to grow under idealized conditions, you can get it up around 4 or 5%. Well, actually, that's only in the algae are better than plants. So but that's under optimum conditions, which you wouldn't maintain all the time because it's nighttime part of the time, and if you're going to grow them out in the field. So there still is a limit for efficiency. So one of the things we also considered was how do you improve it? And you have to think about the photochemical processes, and that boils down to collecting the solar spectrum better. So plants have a disadvantage that they don't harvest most of the solar spectrum. They only go out to about 700 nanometers, and that wastes more than half of the solar energy. So one way to improve that is to spread it out, and they also use two photoreactions that are absorbing the same wavelengths of light. So instead of overlapping so that they can complement each other, they actually compete against each other. So one idea we kicked around was engineering a plant that could have two photosystems that use complementary parts of the solar spectrum, so that you would, if you could do that, you would double the efficiency right there. So those are some things to think about, but it's going to take some serious engineering to get up to 10% efficiency with biofuels.
The bet that people are making who are investing a lot of money in microalgae biofuels is that a few things will happen. One will be that they'll be able to leverage the byproducts that are made from the microalgae that are much higher value, like vitamins, et cetera, and that'll help assuage some of the cost considerations. They're betting on the fact that oil is going to become more expensive. They're betting on the fact that we'll be able to exploit the maybe greater than 5% solar efficiency in microalgae, and they're betting on the idea that they'll be marginal, maybe 15, 20% improvements in things like lipid production rate and the energy amount that's required to extract the lipids from microalgae. So there's a few decent economic sort of studies on this so far, and there's a lot of different things that they're betting on. Some come up, but mostly people are positive about it.
Yeah, one of the things that we discussed a lot as well is, and people may not be aware of this, but plants and algae too are not designed to convert solar energy efficiently. They're designed to live and survive and reproduce, and they are optimized to grow under fairly low light. And when the light gets high, they quench it all. And so under strong light conditions where you'd like to convert the solar energy into something useful, they dissipate almost all of it. And so those kinds of processes have to be worked around in order to make plants more efficient. And actually, plants are much worse than that than algae are. And so because they worry about drying out too, and whereas algae are in water. And so there's a lot of issues like this that need to be considered. But I think there are reasonable strategies for engineering improvements.
If I can interject on that one, I think another key piece to keep in mind when considering efficiency is only part of the overall analysis, and the other part is cost. So cost efficiency is a big issue in bringing these technologies to commercial applications. So for example, this number of 10 to 15% that's kicked around for solar energy conversion in photovoltaics, well, we could look at gallium tin arsenide multi-junction cells, which have upwards of 40% but come at a higher cost. And I think this is one area in which biology offers at least inspiration as how to use low-cost materials for these capture and conversion technologies. So that's something I think most of our panel would agree with. Another question from Mark.
So, the hydrogen production, your business. Here's my question. So hydrogen production through this synthetic photosystem 2 step. You know, this is, you know, what I barely understand it, right? But the way I do understand it is that you're stealing electrons from some surface and then you're replacing those with water, right? And so this is must be some kind of surface scale reaction. You know, in order to make this a plausible technology, it would require a tremendous amount of surface, right?
That's right, yeah.
Right. And so can you go into what you're doing with that, or what technologies are being developed in order to create sort of what I would imagine is a massive amount of surface catalysts to do these reactions on us that would scale to the industrial level?
Right. That's a good point. And mass transport issues are going to ultimately become very important. And so I can tell you a little bit maybe to give a little bit of preview of how Nate Lewis is thinking about that. But he's thinking about this in terms of nanoscale design. So he's interested in building nanorods that have high surface area that are decorated with catalysts. So they have a lot of catalysts, and of course then you have to have transport issues through, to get the water in and oxygen, hydrogen out as well. So these are issues, but the same kind of issues are also present in fuel cells, except it's going the other way. And maybe Andre could say a little more about that. But there's been a lot of work done on nanoscale architectures for fuel cells. For example, IBM has these carbon whisker technologies that have all kinds of surface area for the reaction. And so there has been a lot of effort and success in development of these kind of nanostructures.
Is the thinking to couple these processes, because if you're stealing electrons from the catalyst and you're replacing them with the water, then you're doing something with the electrons. Are you moving those into batteries for storage? Is that this? Are you going to couple these sort of technologies?
Well, you could imagine storage in the form of fuel, which is what I was talking about, but batteries could be a form of storage too. So that, and Andre touched on that as well, that you could store the electricity directly. You don't need to do any chemistry.
Right.
Well, you have to do the chemistry within the batteries, but you don't have to do any chemistry to make a fuel like hydrogen that you would use.
But you're generating electricity by directly producing hydrogen. Is that correct?
The other way around, actually. You're using the electricity you generate with light to make hydrogen.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm getting it backwards because the way I understand is that you're splitting water because you're replacing electron loss through that catalytic reaction. So
Right.
there's electrons are being lost off of that surface, right?
Basically, what you're doing with light is you're making a voltage. In all kinds of, any application of solar energy conversion, light is making a voltage. And that voltage could be used to make electricity flow directly and maybe charge up batteries. Or you could use that separation of the positive charge and the negative charge to do chemistry, where the electrons are making fuel and the holes, or the positive charges, are making oxygen. So that's the basic idea.
Again, just to, maybe if I can interject and follow up on this point. With the batteries, it's purely a storage technology, whereas for the photosynthesis and artificial photosynthesis, you're looking at both capture, conversion, and storage. On the storage end, again, you're dumping electrons either into to reduce a molecule to its reduced form, whereas in batteries, you're storing the electrons for storage purposes. But again, coming back to energy densities, Andre shared with a chart. It looked like for the most part, the batteries were about 0.5 megajoules per kilogram.
No, you mean the capacity for?
Energy densities for batteries versus a fuel, numbers I hear are more around 50 megajoules per kilogram. Unless, of course, we begin to talk of things like air lithium, where now you come back on board with about the energy densities of a fuel.
And so the chart that you had with where it showed the air lithium, that was the theoretical, but actually, the operational that's been produced is much lower than that. So,
I see.
yeah.
What would you fuel with this hydrogen that you're generating? I mean, what would you actually run? How would you capture it? You mentioned the engineering challenge. You have to capture the helium, the hydrogen. But what would you actually run with the hydrogen?
It's a good question.
Let me just throw the other part of that out. Methane, natural gas, has an awful lot of hydrogen in it.
Right.
And it's very abundant.
Right.
So what are you going to do? You produce hydrogen. How, are you going to make a hydrocarbon out of it or burn hydrogen?
I think there's been a lot of discussion about a hydrogen economy, and I think many people, including myself, are not too keen on hydrogen as the end all fuel. I mean, it's an energy carrier, and it might be the ideal molecule to make initially, but ultimately, I think you'd like something that's going to be easier to transport and store. And so, I mean, for example, one option is to use the hydrogen in Fischer-Tropsch chemistry. If you can make hydrogen and carbon monoxide, you can make all hydrocarbons. That's well-developed technology. So that might be a better way to go rather than trying to use the hydrogen itself. And as Andre pointed out, storage of hydrogen is a big problem because the density of hydrogen that you store isn't very high. So the hydrogen might be just an initial energy carrier, and you might want to go and form some product that's a little better behaved at the end. And on another front, there's a lot of interest in other reductive chemistries besides just reducing electrons and protons to make hydrogen. Why not just reproduce what nature does and reduce carbon dioxide into something like methanol or even higher hydrocarbons? That technology doesn't exist yet, but there's a lot of research effort on development of catalysts that can do those kinds of reactions.
A question in the back.
Hi. So I think you said that sort of the government was taking steps in the right direction for developing a better or any energy policy that would clearly include sound renewables policy within that. And I think what I understand to be one of the greatest barriers to developing such a policy is basic understanding of sort of the technologies that are being developed and sort of how energy is created with these technologies. I mean, sort of how we can harness some of the energy creation processes to create better technologies. And on the end of sort of the government is funding a lot of these technologies on a one-off basis, but not thinking about infrastructure that needs to come with it or the commercialization side. So I was wondering what you thought the steps were being taken in the right direction and what these look like, and I guess what you thought the biggest barriers are to good policy development with respect to biofuels, solar fuels, and batteries. Thank you.
That's a big question. Someone want to take a first shot at it?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, I think if that's what you're asking in terms of the direction of policy, is I think we need more technical people that are involved in the policy making. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers, because you kind of have this kind of thing where you get an idea and it's kind of might not scientifically be sound, but then people kind of run towards it, and then that's the new thing, and everyone's kind of jumping towards it. And I guess we in academia, we kind of do a little bit of that as well, but I think that's a major issue. I think the success, long-term success, you know, of scientific research, especially in the U.S., is to have sound discipline to look at those areas that other people aren't necessarily studying, and keep funding those areas. I think that's a big thing, because I think, you know, things kind of evolve. Different techniques that weren't available years ago and now become available, and now different areas, as you know, move on, and I think that becomes an issue. The other thing is I've kind of seen a difference, because, you know, as a faculty member, you're writing proposals for thousands of dollars, right? But whereas if you look, for example, with batteries that have been given to battery companies, I mean, it's been millions of dollars from the government, and that's a huge difference. And the idea, you know, because it's politically driven, right? We want to become a battery manufacturing country. All of a sudden, we want to, you know, save our automotive industry, and those kind of motivating factors, you know. But I don't know how that affects long term, you know, our position technically. So a little bit of rambling, but but that's my opinion.
I simply believe that there's some importance in having a stated, clear national goal. Right now, it's a bit of a free-for-all. Money comes and goes. People come up with good ideas and go back and forth. There's not a lot of coordination, and having a clear set goal that everybody, the entire government, or at least a majority of the government, could buy into would be a very valuable asset.
Yeah, I'd reiterate some of the points about sustained funding for research in these areas is really important, and harken back to the Carter era. And so there was this big spike in funding for energy research in his term. Of course, he was a one-term president, and as soon as he was out of office, the programs were completely canceled. You know, so that didn't help, you know, sustained research. And, you know, we've seen another spike with the Obama administration, and my hope is that that's going to be sustained this time, and we're not going to see a repeat of the Carter era.
We have a question off to my right.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment to your question. I'm a visitor here, but I spend a lot of time in Washington on energy policy. I'm the president of the American Geological Institute right now, and spend a lot of time on energy policy, climate change, et cetera. The issue is not understanding the science in Washington. All these ideas are appreciated by congressmen, and congressmen many of them do have a science fellow who's generally a PhD and explains the science to the congressman or the senator. The issue really is, there are major issues. How this will help the economy? Is it a threat to fossil fuels? You know, will the petroleum industry, the natural gas industry, the coal industry feel threatened? You know, are we going to lose jobs? If you're from a state that produces oil and gas, you might not be too excited about new energy technologies. The other thing that we're up against is fossil fuels are very cheap. And the public doesn't feel the pain. When gasoline gets to $5 a barrel, the public feels pain. There are also budget issues, and sadly, the National Science Foundation budget of about $6 billion is an easy thing to cut. It's a tiny drop in the bucket. So it's convincing the legislators that this will really make a difference. It's not a threat. It will create jobs. Tom Friedman has a great book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded. And he talks about how we have to out-green the rest of the world. create jobs with these technologies. You just have to convince Congress that this can be done. They look at the billions of dollars that have been spent on new energy technologies over the last 20 years, and it hasn't made a big change. The other thing you mentioned is one-term tax change, and Friedman describes this in his book. The company in Ohio that created the thin solar film couldn't get a tax credit for more than a couple years. The Germans said, we'll give you a 20-year tax credit if you come build this plant in Germany. There's 600 people working in Germany. They have a 20-year tax credit that drops 5% a year. That's predictability. And all this is a matter of scale. If you're an industry, you don't want to spend the money to invest it if the next Congress is going to do away with your tax credit. But anyway, bottom line is it's not understanding the science in Washington. They do understand the science. It is, will this science make a difference?
Thanks. Our panelists like to respond?
Yeah, I think economics is really what drives all of this, and I think there's a huge concern about the price of gasoline going up and it having a big impact on the economy. And Steve Chu was given an honorary degree last May, and some of us had an opportunity to meet with him in the afternoon before the day before, and he was lamenting the fact that even a 15-cent increase in the gasoline tax was a non-starter on Capitol Hill, and 15 cents is not going to make any difference at all on demand. And so it's just not going to, the pricing is just not going to make it happen.
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments in response to some of the other, one in response to the other question about, one was about the lithium reserves, and it's my understanding that the country of Bolivia is exceptionally well endowed. So it's just, if you're interested in lithium as really at a global manufacturing level, the big salt lakes in Bolivia are going to be as dominant in lithium as, say, platinum and palladium are for catalytic converters coming out of South Africa. We are going to have to be involved with Bolivia if we want that to be a secure kind of resource. The second point is, I think, Gary, you mentioned that the line of reasoning that there's, based on the fact that we haven't adjusted the oxygen level of the atmosphere significantly, means that we therefore haven't made any budge in the global reserves of hydrocarbons, because those hydrocarbons were made originally from the, paired with the production of oxygen. And I would say the only flaw with that is that most of the carbon in the Earth's crust that's produced by photosynthesis is actually stored in either carbonate rocks or disseminated carbon throughout shales that is not at a mineable level. So I just don't think that argument can be used as an estimate of reserves.
Well, I'll take exception with the point about carbonate rocks, because carbonate is oxidized carbon, and you need reduced carbon to balance the oxygen in the atmosphere. So you've got a redox imbalance if you try to argue that it's in the form of carbonate. Certainly a lot of carbon is in the form of carbonate, but the biomass that's compensating the oxygen in the atmosphere has to be reduced carbon, not carbonate.
Okay, that's fair. There's also disseminated carbon in shales and things.
But I think the point you're making is correct, is that the overwhelming fraction of that buried biomass is not going to be extractable. Yeah, so we're never going to get to the point where we could burn it enough to get rid of, turn the atmosphere back anaerobic, because most of it's not extractable, and it's going to get increasingly expensive to extract and make gasoline. So we saw the peak oil plot here, and that's real. Petroleum is not going to be a sufficient supply in the near future.
Great. I think due to time limit, thank you so much for coming, and please join me in thanking the panelists to give us this great discussion tonight.